think I've got something like 20 minutes with questions included. I'm just going to talk for about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, quickly about security tokens and what I'm interested in right now and what I'm doing, and then I'd like to have some Q&A session because and interact with you on certain aspects which I find particularly interesting. So why, just this very simple title, security tokens at last? You all remember it and know it. There was, especially 2-3 years ago, this whole discussion about, token types and token typology and so forth. Is that better? Okay. And and there were, I mean, especially on this, on the side of academics and people, I think, in the blockchain space and community, there was a lot of excitement because of all these different token types. And so this is just an old graph that came from the token classification framework. But I think you probably 2 or 3 years ago you must have seen like hundreds of these, with different categories. And because of the hybrid nature of tokens, and especially utility tokens, security tokens, and all, and so forth, there was, a lot of excitement. Now, why do I want to mention this? Is that at the time, and I'm a bit, probably, unfortunately, a bit older than the average age in the room. But for someone like myself who used to work in traditional finance and derivatives and so forth, I thought at the time, and I said it, that it was a bit unfortunate that that there was this sort of stance to avoid regulation and to avoid, for various reasons which I totally understand and which I think sometimes were valid reasons, but this whole discussion around the token type was probably somehow preventing mass adoption of blockchain, which I thought was, particularly interesting, and which I think is the most one of the most interesting pieces of the overall situation. So right now, I'll make it very quick in a very short formula. What I'm interested in is bringing traditional finance to blockchain, and bridging between the old and the new world. Very simple. So you remember, in 2017, December, there was the EthCC chairman, Jay Clayton's speech on cryptocurrencies and ICOs, in particular, and there had been many successful ICOs, and he emphasized substance over form. I'm not going to go back on what the OE test is and so forth. You've probably you probably heard it as well, 1,000 times. But there was always the risk to satisfy the 4-pronged OE test and end up with an investment contract. And why is that? Because essentially, and I advised a few startups doing ICOs at the time. There was always the risk that, why would people buy your token? I mean, there's some of you are idealists in the room, and I think that's great. I'm also an idealist. But, I also have some form of financial, interest in me, obviously. I have a family to feed. And, I wouldn't buy any tokens if I didn't think that they were going to go, their value was going to go down to zero. Or you call it philanthropy, and that's another activity, and that's also great, but So there was always the risk of qualification of an investment contract. And it was very hard to pretend there were no profit expectations in utility token ecosystems or, so-called tokenomics, which, by the way, as an economist, is a great area of research, and one of the fantastic things I think due to to blockchain is obviously the opening up of economic fields and economic research to to sort of new business models. So, but all in all, the main point was that the traditional finance, and I forgot to mention, but for instance, within the Blockchain Perspectives Joint Research Initiative, which is a blockchain initiative that I co-started a few years ago, and we work with, in particular, one large French bank, BNP Paribas, and one of my sort of overall interest, and year after year, is to see how blockchain can be used, and whether traditional financial institutions are going to adopt it or not. And I've seen from a very different, very distant stance, starting 3-4 years ago. Now, there's real. I think some real things have happened and are going to continue happening. So, and just the title. What I thought at the time was, just stop dodging and start embracing. And embracing what? Embracing the fact that probably one of the most powerful blockchain applications is just, bringing traditional finance onto blockchain and using security tokens and assuming completely the fact that they were security, not in the sense of safety, but that they were financial instruments. So my key message here is that I strongly believe it. Many people question it, but security tokens, and that may be, security tokens are a cornerstone in the future of traditional finance. And I'll be happy to see what happens, 3 years from now. But I think we're going to see a lot of, we've already started seeing many new, applications and decentralized finance and so forth. But it's, essentially, one of the problems I see is that it remains in terms of volumes and flows very marginal. So, for instance, if I ask you, give me one blockchain killer app. Okay, there's going to be. You can always say, okay, you've got your wallet and you can buy Bitcoin and cryptos, and that's the first one. But after that, that is something I ask myself like every other month. Okay, so what is the blockchain killer app? And why, So I'm going to skip a few things, and I will get back to them. But obviously, the vision, the long-term vision for me, and I saw that there was, other talks on neobanks. The vision is very simple. For me, the blockchain killer app is just getting, here you have a whole slew of neobanks, but it's just getting, a smartphone app, your neobank smart, app, giving you availability, a full potential to buy pretty much any financial asset you want. And that is, traditional assets, share of funds in particular, crypto obviously, for whatever, whatever crypto you want. Whether it's for using a particular system or other things, or, I would call it payment crypto. And other applications, and through some top-up situations, I just go to I don't know, I just go and buy something with my neobank app, and I decide that to invest as I do that, €2 extra or $2 extra in whatever share of the retailer that I'm currently buying from, because there's something cool I like about it, something like that. So this whole possibility of just tapping into the existing, financial assets, and, that is called tokenization. And that is all the excitement that we see about tokenization. But for me, that won't be the only killer app, but that's going to be one of them. And that is where I would like to go in the future years. So now, if you look at the benefits of tokenization, so this is a simple, this is taken straight out of the 7 criteria brought forward by Tokeny, which I'm sure you know of. Maybe there's someone here in the room working for them. There's many tokenization providers on the market. There's obviously, consensus. But Tokeny is one based in Luxembourg. That's another one, and there's a couple of other ones. If with my finance professor cap on, I look at the benefits claimed, those 7 benefits, automation, it's obvious. Shared information and transparency, it's also obvious. Cost effectiveness, I'm going to go back to this. Immutability, also obvious. Inclusivity, liquidity, and speed. All those criteria are sort of, intuitively obvious to me, to you as well, and that is why financial institutions have decided, to really pay strong attention and increasing attention to blockchain. Now, I've highlighted, and maybe I'll make some additional comments on some of those benefits, but on cost effectiveness, I want to highlight this because this is currently I'm trying to finish a report on this, and that is something which is very both interesting but hard to do. I mean, if you look at the cost effectiveness of using blockchain for tokenization and tokenizing all sorts of assets, there's 3 perspectives I think which need to be looked at. The first one is the issuer's perspective, obviously. So, you're a real estate fund, you're whatever company, you startup, what have you. You instead of doing an ICO or using crowdfunding or any centralized form of finance and of issuance, you may want to tokenize, to do an STO, and you want to make sure that it's going to be the one-off cost of doing the STO is going to be less than other alternative forms. You also want to make sure that the running cost is also going to be, less than other alternatives. And, there's a lot of qualitative assertions out there, but I've never, and that will be one question actually I may have for the audience, for you guys, is, I've never seen any properly assessed cost effectiveness study on this question. Now, the second perspective is obviously the investors, and the third and not much debated perspective is the infrastructure providers. That is a very dull subject, actually, even for finance professors. But what is called post-market, the way, the financial infrastructure which is used to make, to make sure that the financial system works and that proper recording of who owns what is done once trades are made. The post-market infrastructure is a subject that is not very much covered even in finance courses, but which is a very important one, and that is what is hopefully gonna change, and the key issue in STOs. Now, I want to link it to the decentralized finance, track, obviously, because here, you want to, the infrastructure providers, right now you have, things like clearinghouses, you have custodians and so forth. All those guys, all those agents are probably, and this is also debatable, but will have to evolve. And when you talk about decentralized finance here, I would guess that it will be more B2B decentralized finance than peer-to-peer, strictly speaking, and hence using consortium or enterprise blockchains, and Ethereum as one, obviously. But that is my view on this. I would go very quickly because I've got three minutes left, but 4. STOs. If you make an assessment of what happened in 2019. It's a good start. You've been a few issues. I mean, in France, I don't write names here, on purpose, but you've had things like Mata Capital, which is a real estate fund, which actually did it in 2 tranches, which I believe has been very, very successful and raising in the order of something like 90 millions, I think. But most, there was another one with Forge, subsidiary of Société Générale, but they didn't take much risk and issued a sort of $100 million bond to one of their own subsidiaries. So it's all under the SG umbrella, and they manage risk very carefully. But the thing, and I could go on names, but essentially, you can notice that it's mostly in real estate, essentially private placements. And one of the reasons for that is that the regulatory framework, and I'd be happy to discuss with that. To discuss about that outside the room, but the regulatory framework, despite I think energetic efforts on European regulators, has not been as effective maybe as one could have hoped. There was a lot of efforts, during the ICO wave, and in France in particular, there was Loi Pacte and certain achievements and big consultation by the AMF, the French regulatory authority. But then the ICO wave dried out, and now we're left with STOs. And I believe that essentially the only two jurisdictions that have clear regulatory frameworks as of now are Switzerland and Singapore. So in terms of feedback, if you talk to, and I'm trying to talk to anybody who's done an STO these days, the very positive feedback, you see that there's clear benefits that are identified by those asset managers and those various funds and financial institutions. Things such as having on-chain identities and reducing the cost of KYC and AML procedures and so forth. Everybody is sold on that. Now the negative feedback which I see, which was to be expected, is that still a lot of traditional asset managers are unfamiliar with blockchains, setting up their own wallets. That's that's another level of complexity for some of them, and things like managing private keys. Let alone things like managing private keys. So there's a lot of education, and for professor it's useful, and ergonomic, I call them ergonomic APIs that would need to be developed. So very quickly, in 1 minute, the takeaway points for me is that the easy thing to do, if there are any asset managers among you, I doubt it, but who knows, the first thing is to, I've come to the conclusion, the first thing is to onboard, portfolios on blockchains. That is something quite easy to do, and I'm discussing with some providers to do that for some of the startups that I work with. Now, the second thing is, shadowing existing systems is obviously the recommendable thing to do. That is what the Australian Stock Exchange, has been doing with a chess system, and it's just common sense. Maybe some people, focused on the Ethereum community won't appreciate that very much, but I strongly believe that actually some kind of blockchain agnosticism is highly recommended. Obviously, obviously, I think Ethereum, if you look, some of the STOs that I've mentioned, whether it's Meta Capital, Forge Santander also did one, they were all done on Ethereum. There were others, Bitbone, Stellar, and so forth, but Ethereum clearly has the lead, and I would actually praise the fact that of all communities, Ethereum was one of the first communities that understood what, that business needed to be conducted on blockchain, and that to have enterprise solutions, you needed to have solutions for enterprise to adopt. So now what you see is that other blockchain ecosystems have at last understood that it's great to have a blockchain, but you need to have flows, you need to have business, it's not a dirty word for me, running on blockchains, and so that, for instance, it would be interesting and intelligent to incentivize startups to develop on your blockchain. And so Ethereum, and with institutions and people like Joe Lubin, Consensus, and so forth, understood that a long time ago. So clearly Ethereum has the lead, but I still think that I wouldn't invest in a business that does not that cannot interface with 2 or 3 blockchains. Clear need for stable coins. I will, it's a great subject, very trendy, I would say. I'll skip on that, but it's common sense. Key questions for adoption is really to work with traditional finance guys and asset managers to show them that processes are more efficient, that they will be cost effective in the long run. Second point, report that I'm currently working on. And last thing, how new value-added services can be added. And that is something very important, and here there's a lot of room for creativity, and I've seen a few talks here that address that. And I finished that on the ambitious programs. Eventually, as someone who's worked in derivatives and securitized products, one of the great applications of blockchains would be, smart contracts and so forth, would be to be able to port securitized products and algorithmic portfolio management and over blockchains and issuing STs against that. So I give you a precise example, something that I used to do, overwriting, using systematic option strategies, over blockchain. Overwriting, for instance, is something that would be greatly done by smart contracts over blockchain. With that, sorry if I was a bit long, but I'll end up here. Maybe 30 seconds for a question, or not even? No? Okay, sorry. So I'll be outside, if anyone wants to discuss that. Thank you very much.
La présentation, c'est là.